On the political front, redistricting is happening all across the country at all levels. And as the shape of representation is literally changing from coast to coast, some, like the researchers at the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, are suggesting in a new report that what needs to change most is the number of people Americans send to the U.S. House. Here to explain more about why more may be the reform concept Americans are dreaming of is Kim Alexander, president and co-founder of the California Voter Foundation. Welcome back to Fox 40 News at 11.
Hi, Sinceri. Great to see you.
Nice to see you too. So something we've heard a lot about during the last presidential election was the elimination of the Electoral College, mostly because voters have gotten frustrated with discrepancies between who wins the national popular vote and who wins the Electoral College and ends up president. An increase in the number of U.S. representatives could balance this out.
That's right. And in fact, the House was designed to grow as the nation grew. That's the way that the framers of the Constitution envisioned the House. The Senate is designed to make sure that all states have representation. The House is supposed to make sure that all people have equal representation. But in 1929, Congress enacted a law that placed a cap on the total number of House seats at 435. A lot of people don't realize this, but that is not written into the Constitution. That's something that was just passed by statute, and we can amend that law. And if we did, we would have more representatives in the House, which would give us better representation, but we also would have more votes in the Electoral College. I believe that the Electoral College is gerrymandered, and by artificially suppressing the number of total House seats that exist, we've given small states a greater say in deciding who becomes president at the expense of those of us living in larger states like California.
Now, you probably shocked some of our viewers, so going to repeat it. No constitutional amendment would be needed to raise the number of seats in the House from the current 435 to what you and others suggest it should be around 650. Can you kind of give us the Cliff Notes version of how we landed on 435? Because it wasn't really supposed to stay like that.
No, and in fact, at the beginning of this country, when the Constitution was written, we had 30,000 people per congressional seat, and that number expanded, and the number of seats expanded all the way through to 1910. And around then, the members of Congress said, you know, it's getting a little crowded in this building. Maybe we need to put a cap on the total number. And that's what they did a couple years later in 1929. So what we now have is a fixed number of seats where it was supposed to keep growing, and then a growing number of representatives per seat, to the point that now we have one representative per every 760,000 people, and that is way more than any other modern democracy in the world. Second to us is Japan at 272,000. So, you know, people feel they don't have good representation in Washington. The truth is they don't. They're sharing their representative with hundreds of thousands of other people, and you know, we could get more people in there, have more representatives, build a bigger building, use remote meetings and hearings like we've all learned to do. We shouldn't let the size of the House keep us from having good representation.
And we all have learned about the Zoom. There's a big movement to push back right now against what some think is a suppression of voting rights across America. Some 19 states have passed new laws since the last presidential election limiting how people can vote or how and when ballots can be counted. Now, some feel the redistricting happening now is adding another layer of racial bias to these voting changes, drawing areas that are whiter and less diverse than they may have started out. Now, you believe the current system, as you mentioned, is a gerrymandering of sorts of the Electoral College and a serious civil rights issue in its own right. How so?
Yes, well, the fact is that those populous states such as California, Texas, Florida, and New York are also home to the most diverse populations in our country. And so I believe that this cap on the House is a violation of the 14th Amendment, our right to equal voting rights in the country regardless of our race. And so if we were to lift the cap, we would, for example, if the House had been able to grow at the same rate after 1929 as it did before, California would have about 80 representatives, not 53, and we would have 10.7% of the Electoral College vote instead of 10.2%. So that really adds up, and that's the kind of reform we hope that we can achieve in the future. This isn't going to be easy, but I really appreciate that the American Academy of Arts and Sciences is getting this idea out there, trying to get people to think about this and think about how we could achieve more equal representation in the U.S.
And looking at the current system before we run out of time and what you think it should change to, not only does the current system, in your opinion, give smaller states sort of an outsized vote in the Electoral College, but also when it comes to our judiciary, because it's the House of Representatives that sort of determines that.
Right. So because of this cap in the House, we've actually artificially expanded the voting power and voice of voters in smaller states at the expense of voters in larger states in all three branches of government. You know, the Senate was designed to be the place to make sure small states had representation. Now we see in the House our representation is curtailed because of this cap. That translates into our representation being curtailed in voting for president, and the president, the executive branch, decides who is in the judiciary. So, you know, you have this over representation of the smaller states now across all three branches of government. We need to reform this, and this is something that the California Voter Foundation will be exploring how we can do in the coming years.
A lot to think about, in a concept I don't think a lot of people have thought about at all. So thank you so much for coming in to share with us about this.
My pleasure. Thank you.